And we're back.
Oh, let's try that again. Bring it back.
And we're back.
Very good. So we talked. The last thing that we noticed was that the Battle of Gettysburg led to total war. All right. What does that mean? Why? Why would the Battle of Gettysburg lead to total war? Jonathan?
The South just wants to fight to destroy.
The what?
The South wants to fight to destroy.
The South wants to fight to destroy. Okay. Not just the South, though.
I mean the North. Yes, never mind. I meant the North.
Okay, good. The North wants to fight to destroy. Right? So that's what total war means. Good. Total war is sort of expanding beyond just military targets to non-military targets. Any target that could be seen as supporting the enemy. All right. Any not just an actual military target, but even a civilian target that could be helping military, which you can see how you can imagine, I should say, how easily somebody could make a connection, how easily somebody could argue that fill in the blank is helping the enemy. Right? So, random farm in the South, any farm could be seen as helping the enemy because it's putting food in the hands of the soldiers that are fighting, right? And so farms, burn them down, right? Burn the crops, burn down the house, burn down the barn, and this leaves people without homes. Sometimes, quite often, when the farmer goes to defend his home, he can be killed in the meantime, right? So you can see how quickly this becomes a war. How quickly civilians actually get targeted in total war. Okay. Now, why? Why would Gettysburg lead to total war? Someone else. Yes.
Because they basically wiped out both sides totally. There was no point of return. There was major killing on both sides.
Major killing? There was. It was the bloodiest battle in U.S. history. Still, even today, the bloodiest battle. And so, but why would that lead to them wanting to kill more people, though? Does that make sense?
Well, their people also killed our people.
Yes, right? And so we want to. So the fact that this is so bloody means we want to expand our targets beyond military targets. Why? What is the point of this going to total war? What's it supposed to achieve? Michael?
Maybe scare some people so they don't mess with them.
Okay, so scare some people so they don't try to break the South's will, right? We want to break the South's will and get them to surrender. And so if we can cause enough destruction, we can get them to say, that's enough of this. We can't take any more of this. We surrender. All right. So absolutely right. Lincoln wants to end the war quickly. And so total war is an effort to bring an end to the war. Notice the irony, though, that what we're trying to achieve is peace, and how we're trying to achieve it is killing and expanding the number of deaths and casualties. Now, that's an irony that's just part of war in general. All right, all war that's justified, that's even trying to justify itself. Okay, so I don't know that we call it war if it's not actually trying to justify itself. I think we call it something else. We call it terror, or we call it genocide, or whatever. But if a war is trying is a legitimate war and is trying to justify itself, then it's a war that's trying to bring about peace. That's trying to to bring security or peace to a people. And so war is always ironic. War is always killing in order to end killing. And that's always a great tragedy. It's always going to be a paradox. It's always going to be sort of unreasonable in some sense. Unreasonable is not the right word for it, because that's exactly why sometimes it is justified. In my opinion, I think that war can be justified, and that is that sometimes in order to achieve peace, nations need to actually go to war, need to actually kill and destroy in order to bring about peace and safety. However, I think that we should all be able to agree as Christians that war is always evil. War is always bad. While war might be necessary at times, war is always bad. And this irony that we see involved here, the irony of union thinking here and going to total war is exactly why. Because we're trying to bring peace by killing. We're trying to bring peace through violence. And so while that might be the case, we should also understand that it's rarely the case. It's often not the case. So just a little bit of caution here in our thinking about that, and just a little bit of temperance in how we talk about war and how easily we can glorify it. Because I'm one who's fascinated by the history of wars. I'm intrigued by battles and think they're fascinating to study, and I can too easily get excited about battles and think they're cool. And yet, when you look at what's actually happening in a battle, where humans created in the image of God are bringing death and pain on other humans created in the image of God, it's a tragedy, and it's always so. Okay, even when it's a necessary tragedy, it's still a tragedy. Yes.
So, wouldn't while we were reading, it said that Sherman gave orders that nobody is to enter private dwellings unless the people inside the private dwellings start attacking the Union Army.
Yeah.
So does private dwellings include farms? Because that's private property.
Yeah, right. So in the case of so they would burn crops, they would burn barns and stuff like this. But in the process, and this is why I'm saying that any civilians that tried to defend their farms, okay, you notice that you don't enter private dwelling unless the occupants of that dwelling attack you, unless the civilians attack you, right? Well, that happened. That happened, occasionally or frequently, that they would actually try to defend their farm against them, and of course end up as collateral damage in that, right? Yeah.
And why didn't General Lee divide his army and take one army around toward Kansas, and then up from Kansas to Canada, and then from Canada to Maine, and then down to Washington to destroy Grant from the northern side?
Well, the time it would take to do that, the number of men that he had to do that, the cost it would take to do that, you would need Britain's involvement in that, and Britain has not allied themselves with the South in an official and total way. So they have sent there were some British advisors and generals that aided the South, but there was no alliance between Britain and the South, and that would have been an act of aggression on Britain's part to aid and abet them, to allow them to use Canada, which was British land, to rout us. So That's probably the best reason, but I mean, even if they had Canada available, the time and material and costs it would take to do that would be really difficult. So, all right. So, total war is expanding war to non-military targets. And so, whom is Lincoln going to turn to bring about this total war? What kind of general have we seen and observed that would be that could carry the Union Army forward in this kind of war? Any generals that have earned a reputation for this kind of fighting? Sam?
Ulysses S. Grant.
Yeah, Ulysses S. Grant. So what nickname had Grant earned for himself in the Western Theater, in the Mississippi Valley and the Mississippi, Tennessee valleys? Anybody remember? Jonathan?
Well, like, I remember what he did, but I don't think I remember his nickname.
They're gonna refer to him as the Butcher. All right, because of his sort of callous approach to his soldiers' lives. That's an E. Butler? Why did I write Butler? Because he was so cordial and inviting. This way, come on in. No, okay, no, but the Butcher. Come on, Guthrie. I just had the
What butcher you?
B-U-T, and then I knew I was going to go to an E-R, and I thought, Butler. All right. Nope. The Butcher, because he had sort of a callous approach. This is making me wonder if I wrote Butler last period or not. I totally see myself doing it. Everything felt normal about doing that, but anyway. And part of it is the fact that he just has this enormous army that allows him to have this sort of approach to fighting. He has the Confederacy way outnumbered, way more troops, and so he can afford to lose twice as many soldiers as the Confederacy. And so there's a great that's in the old textbook, but Chancellorsville, which this isn't Grant at all, but it does give an example of some of the way that the Union could fight. Okay, Union more than doubled the Confederacy at Chancellorsville in numbers on the battlefield. Okay, and the casualties in that fight, there were like 5,000 more casualties. So it was like 17,000 Union casualties and only 12,000 Confederate casualties in Chancellorsville. All right, so they're just way more, but the Union could afford those. They could afford more casualties because they had so many more soldiers. And so Grant is going to look at the numbers like Chancellorsville, and he's just going to say, well, why did we lose Chancellorsville? We still had them way outnumbered. Why didn't we keep fighting? Right? We could have kept going. Now, that's a fairly callous approach to war, right? That sort of devalues and almost dehumanizes the soldier. That's. I don't want to throw Grant under the bus because he is doing this for ultimately a good cause, and he really does have abolition in mind and at heart, and yet at what cost is my question. So, and the other is going to be William Tecumseh Sherman. William Tecumseh Sherman. Notice his middle name He's named after Tecumseh. You guys remember learning about Tecumseh? Who led that Native American Confederation. By the way, what piece of historical military equipment is named after William Tecumseh Sherman? Anybody know? It's a very appropriate vehicle to name after Sherman. In World War what? In World War II? In what?
The Cherokee?
No.
Sherman was.
I don't think he was. Tecumseh wasn't Cherokee anyway. But in World War II, America's tank, or our main tank, was called the Sherman tank, named after this man, because he's going to run over or through everything in his path, and he's going to leave a path of destruction behind him. That's what Sherman does in his march to the sea. So we're going to head over here to the other side and see Sherman's. Whoa, that is crazy. March to the sea. Now, where is Sherman's march to the sea? Where does it take place?
The sea?
Nope. Almost entirely not the sea, because once they get to the sea, they're done. So.
The desert?
Nope. Yes.
Georgia.
So, Atlanta Falls, and it's been a couple readings since you read this, but if you remember reading about Chickamauga and Chattanooga, that loss at Chickamauga, but then the regrouping that happened there at Chattanooga leads to those are just north of. So technically they're Tennessee, but at Chickamauga is actually in Georgia. But Chattanooga is technically Tennessee, but it's right on the border there of Georgia, and that Union victory at Chattanooga is going to allow troops to come through eastern Tennessee, which is pro-Union, and funnel into Atlanta and take Atlanta. So the fall of Atlanta is going to allow Sherman to then just march from Atlanta to the Atlantic Ocean. And leave a path of destruction. Okay? I don't know why I capitalized path. Path of destruction from Atlanta to the ocean. So it does go to the ocean, but there's no fighting in the ocean. All right, and then our last box here. This total war does have the effect on the South that Lincoln was hoping. Not as quick as he had hoped it would have that effect. He would have liked less destruction to have taken place, but it does ultimately have that effect. And so you have the siege of Richmond. And this is the last stand of the Confederacy before the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse.
Wait, surrender what?
What? At the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. So if you want to know how to spell Appomattox, it's right there on your handout. I only did one T. I say that, and then I didn't spell it right. Psh, there. It's dead. Yes?
A way to remember, like, the path of destruction is it, like, start from Atlanta and then to Atlantic.
Yeah. From Atlanta to Atlantic, boy, the path is very destructive. Oh, I think that's how the song goes, right? Did a song about it, right? Yeah. Oh, the civilians, they are dying. Is that no? Yeah, it's so. So Sherman is an interesting character, and so that is the unfortunate reality behind total war. But there's also, we realize that as he's doing that, as he's targeting these civilian targets, as he's burning crops and destroying plantations, that is liberating. That's actually realizing the emancipation of many slaves who had already been proclaimed free, but hadn't affected their freedom. Now, it doesn't give them resources. It basically makes them homeless. But Sherman's going to kind of have in his wake in this path, he's going to collect a lot of fugitive slaves along the way, which, again, becomes another problem in its own right. Sherman has one of my favorites. Sherman actually had a theory of Reconstruction, a theory of how to put the South back together, that involved dividing up plantations and giving land, actually giving portions of those plantations to the freed men. That was his theory of Reconstruction, and so that makes all kinds of ethical sense. It would be a legal nightmare, because these civilian lands actually have to be confiscated from them and divided out, and so you have to kind of have to work around. Can we do that as a country? But that was Sherman's idea. That's what Sherman wanted to do. Yeah. But the guy who's creating a path of destruction, burning everything on his way, isn't terribly concerned about legal issues. He's just, hey, what works? What's the best thing to do? Do it, right? So he kind of has the luxury of being able to have that sort of pie in the sky theory of Reconstruction. But we're ahead of ourselves, because we need to say there's this great story of Lincoln passing through Richmond after it had surrendered, and he's taken a tour of this former Confederate capital, and a couple of POWs are being held by some Union, so prisoners of war. So these are Confederate soldiers held prisoner by these Union soldiers. And Lincoln passes by them, and the Union soldiers say, "President Lincoln, what would you have us do with these traitors?" And Lincoln, his reply, does anybody remember what his reply was?
Send them back to their home.
No, that's a good guess, though, and that's pretty close.
Send them back in boxes.
Nope. You're getting colder. Yes? Closer. He says, let them up easy. Let them up easy. And he says it twice. I don't know why, but maybe just for emphasis. But I like it. So on these Confederate soldiers, he's going to say, let them up easy.
What does that mean?
Let them up easy. What do we think that means? Yes, Kate?
Let them get back on their feet after the war.
Yeah, let them get back up on their feet. Good. What Lincoln does not want to do, he has no interest in trying to rub salt in the wound and adding insult to injury. He doesn't want to kick them while they're down. Okay. Everybody understand the great irony of Lincoln's position here. What is Lincoln trying to do? Jonathan?
Well, he's trying to fight the South and then try to be their friends.
Yeah. Why? What is he trying? Why is he fighting the South? What does he win if he beats the South? Felix?
He keeps them a part of the United States, and he's kind of trying to ease them back in.
Yeah. Right. So notice he's fighting he's fighting to get these states. Okay? He's fighting to get this. His prize at the end of this fighting is those states. What does he have to do in order to win that prize? He has to destroy those states. Right? You understand the irony of this? It's like if you're engaged in some sort of contest to, who can take this trophy and destroy it into the ugliest, most, minuscule pieces you can possibly destroy it. Well, what do I get if I can do that? You get the trophy. Oh, cool. Thanks. That's his goal. That's what he has to do. In order to keep it, he has to destroy it. And so he wants to destroy it as little as possible. He wants to break the South just as little as he possibly must. Now, so his decision to go into total war, his decision to let the butcher loose on the South was not lightly taken up. And so, but that was clearly going to be a difficult decision, but he did make that decision. He says, okay, go, Grant, Sherman, break it, because it's the only way that we'll have it in order to be able to keep it, right? So that leads us to our next handout. So do you think that Lincoln will want to make it easy for these Confederate states to be readmitted to the Union?
No.
Okay, they've called themselves their own country, right? So in order to be readmitted to the Union, they will actually have to be annexed, just like a territory would be annexed. They would have to be readmitted. So does he want to make it easy to readmit states?
Yes.
Yes, he wants to make it easy. Now, does he want to impose a lot of reparations or consequences on the South, on these Confederate states?
Yes.
Does he want to have a lot of punishments on these former? No, he wants to let them up easy. So let them in easy, and don't impose a lot of reparations on them. Okay, and so what we have here, what you have there on your handout is Humpty Dumpty, right? So he has, and Humpty Dumpty has been broken because he had a great fall. Okay, so who is not in the story of Humpty Dumpty?
Who made him fall?
What?
Who made him fall?
Well, I might disagree with you. I have an interesting theory on Humpty Dumpty. Okay, but who's not involved in putting Humpty Dumpty back together? He's mentioned in the story, but he doesn't actually play a part in the story. Who's absent from the process? Sam?
The king.
The king is not there. The king's horses are there. The king's men are there. The king is not. So he's mentioned because he's got horses and men. King is not mentioned at all. All right? Now, here's my interesting theory on Humpty Dumpty. Okay? Humpty Dumpty was not able to be put back together because the king was not involved. If the king would have been there, he would have put Humpty Dumpty back together. Because, and here's the second part of my thesis, my Humpty Dumpty thesis. Because the king was the one who pushed him. The king pushed Humpty Dumpty off the wall because he had a plan. He would have never done so if he didn't have a plan for how to put him back together. And so, this king who pushed him off clearly had a plan to put him back together. Otherwise, he would have never done so. And so if he would have been there, if the king would have been there in the story, he would have put Humpty Dumpty back together. He would have, because he knew how to do it. All right? Now, has anybody ever heard this theory of Humpty Dumpty before?
Yeah.
You've heard that theory before?
I haven't heard it, but I can relate it to the real thing. The Civil War.
Okay, so yes, you're absolutely right. This theory of Humpty Dumpty only makes any kind of sense when Humpty Dumpty is an allegory for Reconstruction. All right. So what is Humpty Dumpty? What does he represent?
The South.
Let's raise it. Let's raise a hand for the to. What does Humpty Dumpty represent? Again, let's raise a hand if we want to. Yes, Michael.
The South.
Excellent answer, Michael. Thank you. Humpty Dumpty represents the South. Good. Now, who is the king? Yes.
Lincoln?
Lincoln is the king. Lincoln pushed Humpty. Lincoln broke the South because Lincoln had a plan for putting the South back together. Okay, and so the king is Lincoln. So let's look at Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction. What was his plan called? Yes, Jonathan.
10%.
All right, the 10% plan. Why was it called the 10% plan? Somebody else? Anybody know why it was called the 10% plan? Nobody? This is the part of making it easy to return to the Union. All right? The 10% refers to making it, yes?
Yeah, I remember now. Basically, so they have 10% to be able to bring the states back in the Union.
Yes, 10% of that state's population has to vote to be readmitted. That's a very small percentage of the population, right? Only 10% of the state has to agree or has to vote to do it. Okay, 10% of state votes to rejoin the Union. So that's very, very easy. So that's letting them in easy. But we also mentioned he wants to let them in easy. He also wants to treat them nicely once they're in, right? So the other part of this 10% plan is let them in easy, but then also let them up easy. And that is, we see that in amnesty. So he's going to offer amnesty. You guys saw this word because you're actually going to see an amnesty act carried out. Amnesty actually becomes a real thing. But what this promises is forgiveness, for lack of a better term, of all but the highest Confederate officials.
So Robert E. Lee didn't get back easy.
So the so some generals, certainly, like Jefferson Davis, and then other civilian leaders of government. There's really a small group of these Confederates that would still have to just be scrutinized for treason and these kinds of things. But this doesn't necessarily mean that they wouldn't actually, be released. They might have some minor reparations or punishments involved, depending on the degree to which they're following orders, the degree to which they're actually the ones instigating secession and stuff like that. Okay, so that's why it's going to be the highest level up there. Okay, the people that had the most authority over others. Yes, you may. Yes.
So what would have happened if the South won? Like, how would that have changed history?
Well, I would have had to have gotten a work visa to come down here and teach. I would have had to apply for citizenship, and because I'd be moving to a new country, when I moved here to teach. That's one thing. I doubt slavery would still be legal here. I'm sure at some other point slavery would have, these Confederate states that allowed, at some point some other political movement would have risen up and sought to end slavery even in the Confederate States of America. But yeah, but you and I would be citizens of the Confederate States of America, not the United States. I'm sure that the civil rights movement would be pushed back so that we would probably be a few decades behind in civil rights than we are today, and so perhaps we would still be in segregation, right? Like official legal segregation, not just the segregation that lingers on by default in our society. So, yeah.
What about the world wars? What about the World War I and II?
Yeah, I would imagine that the CSA and the USA would be allies in the world wars. I would imagine. I would think that the Confederate States would join the Allies. I don't know. That's hard to. But it seems like they would have similar interests in democracy and yeah. So okay. The last thing that Lincoln is going to do is he's going to form the Freedmen's Bureau. Bureau, B-U-R-E-A-U. B-U-R-E-A-U. So what's the Freedmen's Bureau? Jack, what's the Freedmen's Bureau?
Gave them certain rights,
Yeah, sort of. Not necessarily rights, but opportunities. Okay, so this was a department in the government, a group that formed in order to funnel resources to create schools, to create institutions that would actually help freedmen. Because what you've got when you like I said before, if you just have all these free slaves in the South, right? What you've created is a homeless population that consists of a third of the population of the South, right? That's what you've created by freeing the slaves, because you've kicked them out of the only housing that they had, which was their slave housing, and now you've got them. It's up to them to fend for themselves, to feed themselves and house themselves, right? And so the Freedmen's Bureau says, yeah, that's a problem, and we need to address that and provide a way for these freedmen to become citizens. And citizenship in a democracy involves education. It involves informing and literacy and opportunity. Okay, so that's what the Freedmen's Bureau does. Notice that Lincoln is stretching out his ridiculously long arms to two very different groups. Okay, he's reaching out to help up and to aid two very opposing groups of people. Because while he wants to let up easy the Confederates and not treat them so harshly, he also is reaching out to the freedmen, to the former slaves, and he wants to help them up and give them opportunity. And so very different groups that he is trying to balance a helpful approach to, right? Very challenging position that he's in to reach across both of those lines. Who's the king's horse? Notice that we've made this one singular. Who's the king's horse? Okay?
Grant?
Not Grant. Not Grant. Because after the war, there's somebody that is going to do this work of trying to put the South back together. Felix?
Andrew Jackson?
Andrew
Johnson.
Andrew Johnson. I know it's confusing. Yeah, Andrew Johnson. So we can actually, you can trade this out if it's more helpful for you to remember. If you want to substitute horse out for a different equine of your choice and make that. I think donkeys are equine. I'm not. What?
No, just kidding.
Pigs are porcine.
Just
So, yes, sir. Yes, you may. So this is Andrew Johnson. Not one of the best presidents our nation has had. And what?
Wait, I thought it was Andrew Jackson was with him.
Andrew Jackson was a different guy.
But was it? I
Andrew
don't.
Jackson was
Andrew
the
Jackson was the president, right?
Andrew Johnson was president.
When?
He was during Reconstruction.
Yeah, but like, was he like our 10th president? Like our 11th?
He was Lincoln's vice president. So notice that Lincoln's box is the smallest one on here, right? Because Lincoln is going to play no role. Remember, the king isn't around to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, right? The king's the one with the plan. The king had the plan for putting Humpty Dumpty back together again, but he doesn't get to actually be there for it. Why not? Why? You can say it out loud because you know the answer to this. Yeah. He was assassinated. So he doesn't actually get to be there. Now, interesting thing about Lincoln is he intentionally surrounded himself with people who had opposing viewpoints. He believed very firmly in the American ideal of balance of power. And so when he assembled his cabinet, when he appointed cabinet members, he put together a cabinet of very, very differently minded people, so that a popular book describing his cabinet is called, gentlemen in the back, join us. It's called A Team of Rivals. So it's a team of people that are all rivals of one another. Because he believed in that ideal of hey, let's butt heads so that we can hear all of the opinions and options here, right? So in this effort to, I'll avoid the obvious pun there. So also true, not just in his cabinet, but also in his running mate. So he picked Andrew Johnson as a running mate, not because he agreed with Andrew Johnson's policies, not because he thought Andrew Johnson would make a great leader of the country, but he picked Andrew Johnson, honestly, to get reelected, okay, to get border state support. And so he elected not even somebody from a border state, but somebody from a Confederate state. He chose as a running mate Andrew Johnson, who was from Tennessee. So he was a pro-Union Southerner. Okay? And had a very different approach to Reconstruction from Lincoln. So just a few characteristics of this guy. He's going to be very pro-South. Right? He's from the South, and he's pro-South. But he's going to be very anti-Confederate. So, does he want to make it easy for Confederate states to be readmitted or difficult? Does he want to impose higher reparations or consequences on these former Confederates, or make it easier on them, or go harder? Right? He's anti-Confederate. He's pro-South, and he thinks the Confederates have hurt the South, and so he wants to stick it to them. Right? The other thing is, does he want to, in the South, in his effort to rebuild the South that he loves so much, does he want to funnel resources towards helping the black population? What do you think? No, he does not. He is also very much pro-white. So this would be for him a waste of resources. What we need to be focusing on is rebuilding the infrastructure of the South, possibly introducing industry to it or whatever. But we want to rebuild the South and help Southerners, and that means sticking it to these Confederates who hurt us all by seceding, and certainly not by trying to found schools for this population who are part of the cause of this whole mess anyway, because it was this whole anti-slavery thing that got us in this huge mess. So he is the two arms that Lincoln had stretched out to these very opposing groups. Johnson's interested in helping neither of those groups. His hands are firmly clinched in the middle, just trying to pull up his own white Southern population. And so that's Johnson's position. He's going to have to do that against the weight of Lincoln's men, which would be the radical Republican Congress. And we'll see how this plays itself out. It's going to be very interesting. And not just like nerdy history teacher interesting. It's going to be kind of fun to watch this play out. Okay? So just trust me. But we'll talk about that next time.